Hey all, Grolo here. Welcome to Back in Focus number 11. This is where we take a look back at the prior week, maybe a little more, look for any themes or kind of undercurrents in what's happening, and weigh in on it, like we do. And last week was all about money. Isn't every week about money, Grolo? Shh. This is not the time for debate. Hold that for just a few moments. And then debate me until you're blue in the face in the comments below. There was a bunch of buzz about the EU taking a hard line on game currencies, and then lots of folks were talking about the financial report that they got their hands on from CIG that pertained to the 2023 and 2022 financials of that company. So first up, let's talk about CIG and funding the most ambitious crowdsourced video game ever. At this point, its price tag is probably only eclipsed by GTA 6, and really, who knows how long that'll remain true. The burn rate is accelerating after all. Not that it's any surprise. I mean, the scope of Star Citizen is quite a bit larger than even GTA 6, as far as we know anyway. I'm still curious what GTA 6 has planned for its online component. There's a lot of debate in our community, like, is it going to be grander than GTA 5? I don't know. We'll see. So anyway, there's been a ton of discourse on this financial report. I'll give a very brief recap to catch you up to speed in case you've not been watching a bunch of other videos on it. And then I'll add a few of my own comments. In summary, from 2022 to 2023, revenue went up a little, as did the costs. Overall, profit and loss was inverted from like plus 8 million to minus 8 million. Funny how that works, huh? This was largely fueled by a big liability recognized on one of its offices. But overall, everything looked pretty stable and normal here. No warning signs, just a business doing business things. There's a few things I wanted to highlight that I hadn't heard mentioned elsewhere. One, this report did not include US sales. This was called out in one of the very first pages, the very first page of the report, which reads, "A company engaged with publishing activities for worldwide markets, excluding USA." So right off the bat, this explains their Cloud Imperium financials for 2022 report, which indicates an income of 130.7 million USD, while the annual report and financial statements for the year ending 2023 shows 2022 revenue as 44.6 GBP. For what it's worth, if you run the numbers, this indicates that around 44% of the worldwide revenue comes from the USA and 56% from elsewhere. The rest of the world, I think, as CIG calls it in this report. Or at least it did in 2022, right? Now take that with some salt. I have no idea what the margin of error on that estimate is, but I'll walk you through how I got there in a bit. It's worth noting that their financials for 2022 report, they called out the US income growth as exceeding that of the rest of the world. And then they went on to hypothesize about why that may be, ranging from war in Eastern Europe to a rebounding economy within Britain or the EU. All very interesting things that I know practically nothing about. Now, another thing that they call out in the article was that external development costs was one of the cost categories that increased the most year over year, and that this cost was managed mainly through the US. And so it's interesting to see how Cloud Imperium is evolving here. They're managing most of the salaried engineering work in the rest of the world, which is centered in the UK, where, as I understand it, they're enjoying some very large tax breaks and will be through the end of 2026. if I'm not mistaken. While they manage external parties, like external to CIG things such as contractors, external studios, freelancers, vendors, all of that. They manage all that via their US corporate entity. So all that is to say that the report we have in our hand that everybody's been talking about, it's not a complete picture of everything going on with Cloud Imperium, but it's something we can use to infer things. One interesting thing in this report, which was brought to my attention by a member of the community, because I am not an expert on stuff like this, but they informed me that CIG makes heavy use of deferred income when it comes to pledges. Now, the way this was explained to me is, imagine I want you to do some work for me. And let's say this work is going to take you like 2 weeks. And let's say I pay you upfront for the work. I write you a check for $1,000 or something, like for 10 days of work. We're keeping the numbers real easy here. Now, you can choose to account for that payment as deferred income. So the moment you cash that check, you've made nothing yet in the eyes of the government because you haven't started the work. But after the first week, assuming everything's on schedule, you've earned 50% of that money that I've already paid you. Even though I paid you up front, you're halfway through the project, you've earned 50% of it. And by the end of the project, on day 10, all $1,000 has now been recognized as income. Now, from what I understand, companies can use this in various ways, right? They can defer subscription revenue. For example, if you pay for a subscription to a service and you choose the option to pay in one lump sum all up front because maybe you save a few bucks or whatever, the company that you're paying can choose to defer that income and slowly realize it over the course of the year. Which makes sense because, after all, like, providing you that service is going to cost them money all year long, right? Now, as it turns out, CIG does this with our pledge money. The pledge income is treated as deferred income, and it isn't realized as income until it's allocated towards development. This also means that it can only be allocated toward development. So remember way back in that video I did on the development time and costs, like why games are taking so long to develop? And I mentioned the coffee bar. And some of you came into the comments to rage about the coffee bar being a misuse of your money. Yeah. As it turns out, CIG literally cannot use your pledge money to pay for their coffee bar because of how they're accounting for the income. So you can finally rest easy, because I know that coffee bar was keeping some of you up at night just based on the emotion involved in that discussion. Now, not all of their income is treated this way, right? The money that they earn through merchandise sales, as an example, or their subscription revenue, that's the kind of money that I would assume is paying for the coffee bar. And also for things like CitizenCon. Now, if you're like me, you probably immediately have questions like, how is the deferred income allocated? Like, if I pledge for an Apollo, can that money only be spent on the Apollo? I don't think that's how it works. I would imagine that all the pledge money is kind of lumped in one big pile towards completing the game. After all, like, what good is an Apollo without a working universe, right? Like, people are not pledging for planetary weather and lights. They're pledging for ships, but they need all that other stuff to make, the ship they're pledging for that much better. At least while it's being used. But there could definitely be some nuance there that I don't understand. If you're a finance geek, I'd love to hear from you in the comments on this. Some open questions I also have. Is the deferred income mentioned in note 19, which captures this, right? It's showing 10.6 million in deferred income in 2023, 3 million in 2022. I want to know if that's also reflected in the cash on hand. Like in 2023, they had 13 million cash on hand. Like, does that include the 10 million deferred income? Or is the 10 million on top of that? Like that, I don't know. I would love to know. And then in 2022, they were showing 20 million cash on hand with like, 3 million deferred income. Like, is that inclusive or is that in addition? Like, if it was in addition, then both years would have them right at about 23 million cash on hand if you were including the deferred income for development, which is interesting. Yeah. Alternatively, like, is the deferred income for development purposes like separate? I'm inclined to think that like it's showing as part of it, but if you know better, let me know. And going back to this report only being part of the picture, with the US being a separate entity with a sheet like this all to its own that we don't have eyes on, I'd certainly be curious to know how it differs. Like, are there larger untapped coffers over there or here, depending on where you're watching this from? But yeah, it was definitely interesting digging into all this, even if it's not my usual area. And a special thanks to all you folks in the community that helped me decipher these things. While we're on the topic of funding games, let's talk briefly about the EU and game currency thing. Lots of content was created on this. Just search YouTube for EU game currency law. One of our favorites around here, Bellular News, he did a piece on it. A lot of other people did too. Basically, they're saying that game makers are being greedy, predatory a-holes who are weaponizing how our brains work and using it against us to bleed us dry of our hard-earned monies. Big surprise, huh? Who would have ever thought? But I mean, thank you. Thank you so much to our European friends for taking a stand on this crap. This should have been discussed years ago. But I'm glad it's finally happening. Now, apparently, some of the game makers are firing back with, well, maybe those games will just vanish from your countries. To which I'm sure they're thinking, good riddance. Alternatively, and this would be sad, but, maybe the overseas folks will get reasonable storefronts, and us Americans will just get the bullshit. And we'll end up using VPNs or something to get the EU experience. Whatever. Or maybe our lawmakers will catch up someday and get a clue like our friends across the pond. I don't know. We can hope. As a side note, I saw some commentary on how Star Citizen would interact with something like this, and I think probably not much. Star Citizen seems ahead of the curve here. The focus on this discussion was that the EU was kind of dismantling the indirection and obfuscation around the use of in-game currencies and like how it disassociates your perception of value. Like, it's far easier to spend some red gems than $1, Like, even if $1 is what purchased the red gems, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, I don't get it, but, back in my day, a lot of times we would go to an arcade, and that arcade, you would go to the change machine, right? And a lot of arcades would give you a pile of quarters for your $1, but some would give you tokens. So this whole like indirection and obfuscation started a long time ago. Anyway, CIG has always used IRL currencies, like they're pricing their stuff in USD and GBP and whatever. So they've never been using these in-game currencies anyways. So I don't see much of an impact here. But if I'm missing something, let me know. I can't imagine anyone sad to see this crap go. But if you would be one of those few people, that are bummed about this, hit me up with why. I'm genuinely curious always on other perspective. So I may be skeptical enough to assume that you work for one of them. Anyway, that's all I got for this Back in Focus. I look forward to conversing below, and I will see you all in the next one. Grolo out.